You're listening to Porn Free Masculinity, where you connect to your recovery and your destiny.
Awesome. Great to be with you, Chris. Great to be with you, Rob. I was thinking about this quote this morning as I was engaging with some brothers in the gift of recovery, also the gift of who do we want to become in the second half. And this comes from Richard Rohr. I'm interested in your thoughts and reaction. Okay. And here's what Richard said in some of his teaching under True Self and False Self. He said, abandonment, rejection, loss, and failure seem to be the only things in life that are strong enough to destabilize the protected self. He goes on to say, do not try to engineer your own death. It will happen. Every spiritual exercise is grounded in truth. And so I'm thinking particularly about the first half of that. Abandonment, rejection, loss, and failure seem to be the only things in life that are strong enough to destabilize the protected self. I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what does it take to get me to move? I ironically just had a conversation about this exact thing an hour and a half ago with a friend of ours. And we were talking about what it takes to get guys to do the hard work of working their own recovery, and where it gets to the point where they actually will take a risk and maybe even make an investment, of time or money or energy or whatever it may be, into changing the dynamics. And those four things, I guess which of those four kind of resonate with you? Because a couple of them really resonate with me. I think for me, failure was the one that I really couldn't stomach, like failure of relationship or failure of personal identity. Who am I really?
Yeah. It's so good. I think about, so you kind of took a different direction than I was thinking. You kind of took it, what does it take to be successful in recovery? I was thinking of what it took to get me to the point to become conscious that I needed to make changes in my life. And for me,
I think it's the same thing.
For me, it was loss. It was rejection. Not so much rejection, but definitely loss. It was relational pain that finally caused me to say, all right, this carefully crafted world of mine that was particularly compartmentalized and safe, where I had created so many different, safety mechanisms to protect myself. And of course, at the time, Chris, I didn't know that's what I was doing. But looking back, I can clearly see it. Sure. It wasn't until relational pain and loss that I finally was able to wake up and say, I have carefully crafted a world around me, with me as the focus, with self-protection as my focus, so that I don't have to deal with, face into, live into, feel all of life's reality. And so the question I have for myself and for you and even for other guys as they listen in today is, why? Why did it take so long for me? I mean, started acting out at age 10, 43 was when I was discovered. It took another 4 years to dive in. And the only thing I can tell you is that it was working for me to live this kind of compartmentalized secret life. And, I could kind of do my own secret thing over here and be dad over here and husband over here and boss over here. And, for me, in many ways, I thought it was working until it wasn't. And looking back, being really honest, it never was working the whole time. I had just simply bought into the lie that I had this little compartmentalized view of the world all figured out, and that it really was working. And in fact, it wasn't.
Well, I mean, Rob, as I sit here and listen, I mean, I resonate with you because it was working till it didn't, because that's what I was given. That was the paradigm of life. And I'm going to be very clear. It wasn't the paradigm of life that I was explicitly taught. It was the paradigm of life that was modeled for me, which is there's certain things that we talk about and there's certain things we don't talk about. And there's certain things that are important in life, like for me, it was, behaving, being a good boy. It's a narrative all throughout my story. Being a provider, obviously, as a man, I'm supposed to take care of the financial responsibilities and take care of family. But the reality is, those were imperfect models for me. But yet I perpetuated them because that's what I knew. That's all I knew. And I think you're exactly right. They worked until they didn't, because they were imperfect. They only had a shelf life of X many years. And, my chronology is a little shorter than yours. Probably 20, 25 years in, they really stopped, ground to a halt. And I had to start looking elsewhere. But I think it doesn't matter what the chronology is, which is, what you're saying is, and maybe it's not so much that those four things aren't happening. It's just that I have some kind of a buffer of belief. I can push through this. I can do this. And that's the other thing that you said was, getting to that place where you're willing to let go and say, no, I can't do this. I can't figure this out. And that was where my door opened in the midst of those four difficult dynamics, which was I was willing to ask for help. For the first time in my life, I was willing to ask for help.
I'm curious on that kind of that journey of when you started acting out, not having a model. Were there times that you wanted to tell on yourself? Like you knew inside, deep down inside that, hey, I could be living a bigger, more connected life to my family, to my wife, to others. Can you remember any moments where you were like close, or maybe you actually found the courage to actually tell on yourself?
Oh, I did. I did tell on myself, but I wasn't ready to ask for help. I was asking for a fix or for someone else to fix me. Sit at a lunch and spill my guts to somebody and hope they had an answer that I hadn't thought of yet.
Yeah.
Because for me, it was about, I'm a smart guy, about more information, maybe a new study or book or practice that I wasn't using. But ultimately, everybody that I shared with was like, man, that's tough. Or, the old Christian backslap. I'll pray for you about that.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what to do, but I'll throw a prayer your way and hope it sticks. But I think ultimately, Rob, it was about me.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready.
Yeah. Yeah. I just thank you for sharing that. I wasn't ready either. I mean, so many altar calls, so many prayers. I can only really think of maybe 2 or 3 moments where I was, my former spouse, she was definitely on the trail. And, and of course, my goal in life was to throw her off the trail. We call that gaslighting, and I was very good at it. But there were moments of weakness where I just wanted to be done and be known, to the point of risking it all. And every time I got close to that line of, is this the moment to just simply share what I'm doing in secret? The risk then became, or it felt too great. The risk of rejection, the risk of, and I would always compare to what I had in life. What I had was a fairly safe life. I was paying the bills. I was mowing the lawn. I was taking the family on a vacation once a year. It was not a connected life to myself, to my kids, to my former spouse, but it was safe. And I would walk right up to that line and I would be like, and I would compare and contrast. I would do a T-bar in my head real quick and I'd say, no, I can't reveal. I can't acknowledge. I can't share. And so I would either.
Yeah, but Rob, I have to ask. You keep using that word safe.
Yeah.
What does that word mean?
Yeah. I mean, Well, that's a great question. Safe for me in those moments were it meant comfort. I mean, I had a comfortable life. I say safe because there's a lot of risk in revealing what I was hiding, and there is for every guy that's listening. Will this be the last time? Will my wife walk away? Will I be rejected? And inside of all that is, of course, a lot of core wounds that are potentially at stake. And of course, it's the core wounds that drove me to acting out to begin with. And so I would much rather in those moments settle for a safe, comfortable, small life as opposed to risking what might happen. Now, in the middle of all, just real quick, in the middle of all that, my wife and I my former spouse and I did have a conversation in my young 30s, and I did tell her I was acting out, and I did go to a counselor, and I felt this tremendous shame, and I cried my way through 3 or 4 sessions, and was so embarrassed and so shame-filled that I was crowned healed. I was crowned healed by this Christian therapist. And of course, in my heart of hearts, I believe.
Sorry, I'm not laughing at your pain. I'm grieving at the many times that I've had that experience in my own life and heard others. So the laughter is actually tragedy and not.
I appreciate you using that word tragedy, because that's ultimately what it was. But I felt so much in that moment, so much that weight and the shame kind of coming over me, that I believed that I was done too. I really did. I thought that was it. A few good cry fests, some confession in front of a counselor, forgiveness from a spouse. Thank God this is over and I can move on, right?
In the past.
And, I don't know how long it was, 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, I was right back at it. I come all the way to my 40s, and it's the idea that Richard Rohr shared in that quote. It's abandonment, rejection, relational loss is the only thing in life that can dislodge the protected self. And I moved right back into self-protection. I really did. And it wasn't until separation and ultimately the announcement of divorce that caused me to say, I've got nothing left to feel safe about. Right. Yeah. I had been working hard to figure myself out and figure out healing inside of relationship. And that was no longer there. And so I had a decision to make right there in the moment. What am I going to do with this relational pain that Richard Rohr talks about? And am I going to allow it to dislodge, to break apart this false kind of pretense that I've been carrying around, this protective coating that had worked pretty well up to that point? And I asked that question because, man, I as I've been walking this journey, I get a chance to spend time in the rooms or with other guys. A part of me is like, please learn from me. Don't wait till that moment. Don't wait till that phone call or that conversation where the spouse says, I can't do this anymore. And yet at the same time, there has to be a dislodging moment for every one of us. And and every one of us are different. And so, yes, each dislodging moment ultimately becomes part of our own story. But oftentimes it comes in the form of loss, rejection, and relational pain, doesn't it?
It does. And I think the thing, I'll tell more of my story another time, but the thing that I've seen as the common thread of guys who don't have to go into the valley of the shadow of death or into the deep, dark pit before they look up and realize, I need help, something is wrong, is the beginning of self-awareness, of doing your own individual work. And, you couldn't pick anybody better than Richard Rohr about, what does it mean to be a man? Adam's Return is his book about masculine initiation. And, what does it mean to really stand up for yourself and be the man that you were meant to be in the midst of the difficulty? And I think that word safety, you translate it well. It's really not safety. It's really comfort.
Yeah.
It's, I don't want to do the hard things. I don't want to feel the hard things.
Yeah.
In this place, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, and I know we're coming down to the end of our time for this first session. Yeah. I love that you've kind of gone there with me to unpack this. But I think the other important part to recognize is that I had started to believe my own lie that this was working. Like, there's so many lies. There are so many lies that get cast through this lifestyle of leading addiction. But the biggest and probably the most important lie starts with the one that I tell myself, that this is somehow working, that no one's getting hurt, that I can live two different lives, and it will be okay.
And that's a hard place to stay, as you just mentioned, because it cannot persist.
Yeah.
And I'll even say this: there have been men who live their whole lives like this, and the catastrophe of legacy lingers on behind them.
That's huge. That's huge.
It's big. It's big. Well, Rob, thanks for making the time to be together, and we'll talk again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Hey, buddy. All right.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris at pornfreemasculinity.com.